So welcome to a short video, which is your parent conflict pre-learning video, which is on Remains by Simon Armitage. And of course, take some notes whilst you're watching this video, and then I'm going to test you on it at the start of next lesson, that key knowledge that's crucial to success. Good luck. So this poem has always been a firm favourite with students. It really has, perhaps because of the relatable voice that comes through. It's written in what's called a colloquial style. It's a monologue, and the poetic voice is a soldier. So let's see what you think about it. So what's the poem about? Well, essentially this poem was written to coincide with a TV documentary about soldiers returning from war with PTSD, which means post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, essentially what that means is that when you go to war, you do lots of horrible things, you see lots of horrible, grotesque things as well, and that stays with you for life, and it can impact on your personality, your health, your physical health, and your mental health. So it was to coincide with that, and it was based on this soldier called Guardsman Tromans, who fought in the Second Gulf War, which was in 2003, a really controversial war, if you know about that. But essentially, in this poem, the poetic persona describes shooting a looter, so someone who essentially steals from a shop during a moment during war, and how this person shoots a looter dead, but also how it's affected him. And it explores the notion that mental suffering can persist, it can continue and endure long after a war ends. And that's why it's such a fascinating, it's a brilliantly put together poem. So let's see what you think. So let me read the poem to you. On another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. So all three of us open fire. Three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story. Except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave. But I blink, and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Now you can see in this poem there's lots of colloquial language, especially when he's talking about killing. You can see where he says three of a kind, all letting fly, like indiscriminate killing. I'm not sure they're using pistols, probably using guns, SA-80s, just shooting, letting fly. But essentially we're going to focus on these four areas. We're going to focus on all of the same mind. He's carted off in the back of a lorry, dug in behind enemy lines, and his bloody life in my bloody hands. So let's have a look at those individually now. Well, let's have a look at this one. Are all of the same mind? So he's talking about the fact that his soldiers, all the soldiers, think in the same way. Now, of course, that is a metaphor. Of course, they don't have the same mind, but it's as if they all are thinking the same thing. And what it does, and you've seen this before, it's a metaphor that illustrates and reveals that the soldiers are now machines of war. They don't think for themselves. And of course, this is similar to other poems because it exemplifies the implications and extent of brainwashing and indoctrination. And we've seen that so many different times. that this person, he's not himself, so to speak. He is, he's been told to respond in the same way. He's a machine of war. He is no longer thinking individually. And then, of course, we get this grotesque line. It really is about this dead body. He's carted off in the back of a lorry. Now, of course, that verb is significant because this is a dead person we're talking about here. And carted kind of reveals that it's inhumane, and there's a sickening regard for human dignity during conflict. He's just, thrown in this back of a lorry, carted off, almost with no thought at all. And the imagery kind of illustrates that kind of lack of care and what happens to people during war. Look at the way he's talking about it. We've got that colloquial language where he's talking rather kind of nonchalantly about the killing of someone. And that's what I suppose the poet's trying to tell us. That's what war perhaps does to you. It illustrates that kind of lack of care, which is something the poet wants us to hold on to, I'm sure. But when we get to those final few stanzas, we can see the impact of war and that PTSD, and it stays with him. And crucially and brilliantly, he uses that phrase, dug in behind enemy lines. When you dig in, you build a trench and you assert your position. And we can see here that metaphorical verb, that the memory, the thought of what he has done, and the very thought of this dead person is now in his mind, and it's in his mind forever. And that metaphorical verb dug there is crucial, but it's brilliantly thought through by Armitage. It really, really is. And it shows how the memory from war is both permanent, because that trench, that scar is going to stay with him, that memory is going to stay with him. But also, if it's dug into his brain, that provides us with a notion that memory is very painful and is going to impact, and of course it impacts on him in the form of PTSD. Dug in behind enemy lines, as good a line as you will find, I think, in the power and conflict poetry. And then, of course, you'll see that final line. And those of you who have been doing your Macbeth revision will realise that this is a bit of a nod of the head, a doff of the cap to Macbeth. It's a quote from Macbeth, his bloody life in my bloody hands. And of course, if he is quoting Macbeth, which we think he is, you think about it here, Macbeth is a play which explores guilt, it explores war crimes, and also hallucination and madness that occurs due to past evil events that obviously Lady Macbeth has done. So very clearly here we can see that this is tragic. You can go down those lines. If the poet is relating this to Macbeth, of course, it brings with it those connotations of guilt, war crimes, and madness and hallucination because of that. But equally, the repetition of bloody, what that does is it emphasizes the extent of this poetic voice's guilt. And of course, you've got that alliteration of B, bloody and bloody again. And that kind of seems to amplify the pain and suffering of this person. Someone said once that this alliteration kind of almost seems to connote or imply that this guy is crying and reveals the extent of the degeneration of his mental health. But a brilliant line to finish on, my goodness me. So finally, let's talk about this poem's structure and form. Now, the poem is in the form of a monologue, so one person's talking on their own, and what that does, it conveys a flashback. Now, of course, a flashback is a symptom of PTSD. You can't rid yourself of these memories, so you keep going there in nightmares, dreams, and all the rest of it. So that is really, really crucial, because it suggests, doesn't it, that the memories of war and conflict stay with you for life. Now, if you look at the poem, the shortened last stanza is one we need to notice of. It's a shorter stanza, but what that might do is reflect the permanent change. His life will never be the same again. Someone suggested that actually perhaps that could indicate perhaps he's killed himself and suicide tragically. It could be that, but I think it's that notion that all the stanzas are the same length except that last one, which shows that this guy will never be the same again. Now, the enjambment in the poem really is crucial, because I think it shows that this poem becomes out of control. You'll notice when there's enjambment, a poem really speeds up. And I think that's what happens to this guy's life afterwards. His life starts to unravel. And his life after war, the PTSD, shows a lack of control and structure in his life as a result. So again, we have an example of the structure and form demonstrating that this guy is losing control of his life because of the PTSD. So I'm not going to talk about context too much, because that's really in the poem itself. But essentially, I've just done a bit of a snapshot from your knowledge organizer. And Simon Armitage quote is good for you here. These are poems of survivors, the damaged, exhausted men who return from war in body, but never wholly in mind. So that's crucial. They come back different. And of course, this poem coincided with the increased awareness of PTSD amongst the military, and aroused a lot of sympathy amongst the public. And you need to kind of have a look at the Iraq War in 2003. A significant proportion of the public were opposed to the war. Many thought it was an illegal war because it didn't have the sanctions of the United Nations. So look, best of luck with revising this poem. It's a super poem to look at, really kind of tragic and harrowing, but brilliantly written, and really clever. So good luck, and I'll test you on it in your next lesson. Cheerio.